What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with Lily with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to take a look at the top 4 of the Marvel Snap Card Thwips Community Gaming SEA tournament for this week. This was a really cool one because, as you can see on the screen, we're looking at the 3rd and 4th place decks. And we've got 2 Sandglaive decks. That's what people are referring to this deck as, a play on Sandwave, which was a big archetype a little bit ago, and now we are replacing Wave in the deck with the brand new card Corvus Glaive, which allows us to pick up on some discard synergies while also not ramping our opponents in the same way, and there's some cool ways to take advantage of this. I think that the coolest thing about this is the fact that these are lists that people have come up with not even 24 hours into Corvus Glaive's release. These decks are only going to get more refined over time. We see 2 different decks here with a decent amount of overlap. They've got 7 cards in common, and we'll talk about the differences and the similarities in just a moment. And then I'm also going to get onto the 1st and 2nd place decks from this event. And we'll see where this deck can kind of evolve in the future. I think that that's also an exciting story because we're getting a new discard card next week. That's going to improve the deck, obviously, and people are just going to be able to refine this deck over time. The fact that there's a 5-card difference between these 2 lists means that no one has probably found the correct list just yet, which is really exciting because it means that, you know, this deck is probably better than it even appears initially. So the base package of the deck, we've got the ramp in Electro and Corvus, which allows us to put out an early Sandman and flip the tables on our opponent because a lot of players are trying to dump multiple cards. Zabu is really popular, Serra, and then you also have the stones out of Thanos deck. So Sandman is going to shut down all of that stuff, and then there is also a Hela package. So that is Blade and Corvus Glaive supported by Hela at the top of the curve. There's also a little bit of Odin stuff going on, and part of the reason for that, one, Odin is just pretty good when you ramp. Doctor Doom into Odin is that's a traditional Sandwave curve. That's something that has always been in decks that look like this. So we definitely want to keep that alive in this deck. We're also using Jubilee to ramp out a bunch of expensive cards, and Odin works well with Jubilee. But also, Odin has a unique sort of synergy with our Hela game plan, because if you play all of your cards to the same location, specifically if you play Blade or Corvus Glaive and Hela and Odin all to the same location in that order, then you will trigger another discard and another reanimation out of Hela, which just means you can get more value out of the core components of the deck. So that is really strong. So from there, what are we trying to capitalize on? Well, there's 2 routes that we see across these 2 decks, and Mr. High's build on this side of the screen I think is the most straightforward to talk about immediately. So first off, we've got Ronin, which is probably the weirdest card among all of the... no, that's not true. That's not true. There's a weirder card. There's a weirder card over in this list over here, the one that Lily's looking right at it right now. But Ronin is definitely a card that still does not see that much play, but it is good with Sandman. If you Sandman, limiting your opponent to 1 play per turn, then you are going to be able to have a much bigger Ronin. So that is definitely a nice synergy, and Ronin is obviously a more expensive card, so that also synergizes well with the Electro and the Corvus of it all, and potentially gives you some other routes to victory. It's still mostly good in Sandman games, but can allow you to function without that Hela component in the deck, and I think that that is pretty important. I will say, there is an awkward part about Ronin in the fact that both of these decks and the final 2 decks are all discard decks. Little bit of a spoiler coming for you. But yeah, that's a little bit awkward. Everybody's playing discard right now, so maybe Ronin is not the best, but shout out to Mr. High for trying it out here. And then From there, the rest of the cards in Mr. High's deck are just great cards to hit with Jubilee or great cards to hit with Blade or Corvus. Magneto, Giganto, the Infinaut. We've been seeing these cards in all sorts of Hela decks recently. I think all three of these cards are going to be in the final two decks, which are both Hela decks without Corvus Glaive. Again, just to spoil that a little bit, so you know what's coming. This is the exciting part of the video. This is the interesting part, and then the final two decks, they're pretty tried and true. We will look at them though and talk about what is going on in those decks as well. But cool for Mr. High just to see like all of those big cards used in a slightly different way. The Infinaut is not particularly castable in a Sandman deck, though there is kind of something that I'll talk about in a little bit. I'll just say it now. If you get leeched, that is one downside to playing this deck, but then the Infinaut becomes active. So that is an interesting angle there, turning on your Giganto and Infinaut, and then Magneto, just a big card, and all of these can come out with Jubilee. But let's move on to this list over here that Lily is so intently focused on right now, just by the way that the camera's set up, with Spider-Man 99, Arrow, Heimdall. Crazy. So I was not expecting to see these cards, and I was not expecting Corvus Glaive, of all cards, to be what turned these cards online. But with so Arrow Magneto is a strong package that has existed for a while. It just gives you a lot of control and manipulation while only playing one card per turn. So it works really well under Sandman, and there's also some potential things that you can make use of with Odin and these cards, in addition to Doctor Doom. A really nice curve is Electro into Arrow, into Doctor Doom, into Odin on your Doctor Doom and Arrow. That allows you to put 10 power in both of the other two locations, while putting a decent amount of power in that location where you're playing everything, but also making all of your opponent's cards go over to that location as well. So that can be a really strong curve to consider, and Sandman can also kind of work its way in there. But the other line that this deck is taking is absolutely crazy. Spider-Man 99 and Heimdall is totally wild, and I'm honestly not even sure what I think about it yet. I haven't fully wrapped my head around it, but I wanted to at least share it with everyone here. The thing that is particularly interesting about Spider-Man 99 and Heimdall in this exact list, if you're playing Spider-Man 99, then you have a little bit more choice over where you are playing the card, as opposed to when you're just reanimating it with Hela. But this was an open deck list tournament. And I guess maybe that's not a huge factor, but I think that Heimdall loses a lot of points when you're playing it in an open deck list format where your opponent can see your entire deck before the game start. And I will say that the one strength that Heimdall does have in a list like this is, even though your opponent knows Heimdall is coming, they don't actually, because you have so many different plays that you can make on the final turn of the game. And Heimdall might not even come out on the final turn of the game. Heimdall might be a turn 6 play some of the time. Now, you aren't going to be able to get multiple value out of Spider-Man 99 and like Odining your Heimdall, because Spider-Man 99 only works once, but the fact that Spider-Man 99 is now a 5-cost card means that you are getting more bang for your buck in a list like this where you're ramping into it. So it's very interesting, and I'm really curious about what people think about this list, because I was not expecting it at all. I think that it is totally wild, but I'm totally here for it. Now, our finalists are playing a much more straightforward deck that you've probably seen. They are playing the Hela list that is really popular right now. With only one card difference, Flishwap is playing Storm, which I do think is potentially an underutilized card in the list. They've cut Dracula for it, but Storm is pretty good with Hela because when locations are locked down, Hela can still add cards to them pretty effectively. And Dracula is more to like cover for games where you aren't really able to high roll. Dracula still does good stuff because you're not typically going to be able to discard your entire hand with this Hela list. You're not playing like MODOK or anything, and sometimes you can't make use of like Black Knight or something like that. So Dracula definitely does have some uses, and of course in the mirror matchup, which this final was Hela versus Hela, Dracula is just leagues better because Storm, you lock down the location, but your opponent can just as easily add to a lockdown location as you can. Potentially even easier so, because Flishmop could play Storm, and then Blasco could follow that up with a Dracula on turn 4 into the stormed location. So I think that in the mirror, obviously, the Dracula is going to be much more heavily favored. The other thing that I actually wanted to talk about with this video, though, is the fact that Hela is everywhere, and players are starting to notice this a lot more. I thought that Hela was pretty good for a long time, and I've shared my Hela list in the past. I actually still don't love this list, but it's hard to discount the synergy between Lockjaw and Hela. Lockjaw making your deck more consistent at being able to find Hela, while also giving you an incredible backup plan in terms of allowing you to cheat out big threats with Lockjaw. So Lockjaw Hela, I think that is just a really, really good combination right now. I think that Lockjaw, if any of these things, is probably what is primed for a nerf, because it is also really tearing up with the Thanos lists. So I think we might see another change to Lockjaw in the future, because Ramp is just really powerful and Lockjaw just remains powerful and consistent at the same time in really two dominating strategies right now in Marvel Snap. But without nerfs, we do have an OTA coming. So just checked, and the OTA is not tomorrow, it's next week, which means we're going to have to play with Hela for a little bit longer, and that is why I've been playing Leech in Thanos. Because of Hela, I think that just being able to Leech this deck is one of the ways that you can take out Hela. Hela's kind of tricky because of the fact that it can get played to any location and have an on-reveal ability that impacts all 3 locations. Leech doesn't work if your opponent has a Lockjaw and Hela is in their deck, and that's just kind of an awkward note on the consistency and the strength of this deck. And then also the Infinaut is a little bit of a reason to not leech the deck, or I will say the Infinaut is good in the fact that it can play around Leech, and that is potentially one of the benefits of playing this list from Mr. High with the Infinaut, as opposed to a bunch of random cards that can all get leeched. But I think that these decks are still really powerful, and I'm curious to see where discard goes from here, if Corvus winds up being the prevailing strategy, or if this Hela list is going to remain on top. For this tournament, it was this version of Hela able to claim first and second place, and for today, that is going to be it for me today. Let me know on your thoughts down in the comments below, but that is going to be it for me. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.